Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the development that we've seen as far as the COP27 meeting is concerned. We saw the establishment of a loss and damage fund which has been adopted for 134 countries. Of course, the government has been making efforts for this fund for a while. We saw the Prime Minister speak at the UNGA and then later on take it up further at the COP27. It was of course also the visit of Antonio Guterres which further reiterated the damage that we've seen, unprecedented as far as Pakistan is concerned, and the fact that of course 1/3 of Pakistan is underwater, suffering at this time. It's a huge step forward, it's a huge achievement in terms of the establishment of the fund. What does it mean for the future? What other steps do we need to take collectively? And each country, the kind of steps they need to take individually. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about what this development means for Pakistan as a whole and for all those countries who have 0 to 1% role in emitting carbon emissions but continue to suffer from climate damage. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Munir Ahmed, who is a climate advocacy expert. Thank you for joining us today. We also have Ali Salman, who is an economist. Thank you for being with us. And we're also joined by Ali Tawqir Sheikh, who is Chief Executive Officer, Lead Pakistan. Thank you for being with us. Ji, Munir Sahab, we were earlier also talking about this. As far as this development is concerned, certainly it's a welcome development. We have been saying this for a while. Like I said, the government has been making efforts to try to get as much as possible and for the countries to own up, so to speak. Do you think it's a step towards owning up and it's a huge step forward? How do you look at this?
Certainly, it is a great step when we talk about climate justice. For a while, the UN Secretary General was also talking about climate justice, and Pakistan government has also been very vigorously talking about and doing climate advocacy since the monsoon that we suffered from since early June. And it was realized by the different governments that we need to have certain framework of financing the vulnerable countries for their adaptation, mitigation, and also to provide them technology and capacity building. And certainly we should appreciate the governments that has taken and the parties they agreed to on the development of such fund, to provide some finances for the loss and damages. And I believe, but still they have agreed to form a transitional committee to develop TORs of the funds and how it would operate and how financing and technology transfer will be done in the years to come.
This okay, let's talk about the, of course we have seen the Paris agreement earlier on, and you know we've also talking about some skepticism with which we view that agreement and the tangibles from there, all of that. Certainly one can't talk about what this means for us, and of course it's a huge step forward like I earlier said. Let me come back to you, but Ali Salman Sahab, as far as how, in terms of how binding it is it binding? Is it really, does it have to translate now that the countries have owned up, so to speak?
Well, MAHRUKH, let me just take you back a little bit before we enter into the nitty-gritty of this agreement and the general concept of why this discussion we are having of climate change, global warming, and why the world is concerned about restoring or keeping, let's say, the rise of the temperature to the pre-industrial level by about 1.5%. As an economist, I would first like to submit that globally speaking, we have achieved significant level of growth.
Okay.
There is a cost of growth that we also are paying.
Okay.
When we talk about fossil fuel, when we talk about energy resources, when we talk about the industrial and consumer goods we are having at a very wide section of society, of course this is all contributing to the climate change or global warming, I would say. And a lot, of course, is being driven by the activities in the developed or industrialized countries such as China and US. But also, I think that the benefits are also widespread. And it is true that countries like Pakistan, who have weaker local infrastructure, are actually at the brunt, and the losses of the changes in the climate are actually severe in the countries because of the poor infrastructure. And I think when we talk about the global justice, or we talk about climate justice, we often ignore the local dynamics which are at place. And so to the specific point of the implementation, I think while we are welcoming this announcement, if you look at the scale, I would not be too hopeful. For instance, the indicative startup amount of this fund, as mentioned in UN website today, is about $230 million. Whereas even a country like Pakistan on its own has indicated the need of
30 billion. So
well,
upward
in
of
terms
that.
of the climate change financing, it has demanded or estimated $100 billion in its latest report. So you can see the scale where we are talking about the global fund of $230 million, in even single country talking about the need of international climate change funding. So there are big gaps, but we hope that more than the amount, it will lead to global understanding of some sorts.
Right. Ali Tawqir Sheikh, Ali Saab, okay, in terms of perhaps the amount at this time, it doesn't seem to be very high, granted. But in terms of, we saw what Sherry Rahman said. She said that it's a long struggle. In terms of owning up, in terms of accepting that, this needs to be done, wouldn't you agree that it's a huge step?
Yes, of course. But first, a small correction. I'm no more CEO of LEAD. I'm a member of the National Climate Change Council. LEAD, I retired several years ago. Now, it is a matter of principle. In Rio 30 years ago, Pakistan was the chair of group of 77, just the way Pakistan was at this summit in 30 years ago. And that was a very pride moment for Pakistan, because Pakistan played a very critical role in adopting the principles for UNFCCC and the Earth Charter. We also landed there with our own conservation strategy. So it was a shining moment for Pakistan. For 31 years or so, Pakistan has been extremely dormant, somewhat inward looking, and it shied away from the leadership role that we occupied now, 30 years later. And what is significant about this decision, otherwise it's a very modest, otherwise the accomplishments of this summit are extremely modest. Some can even call it a failed COP. But what is most significant about this is that in 1992, in Rio, we had adopted a principle of shared but differentiated responsibility, which essentially meant that the countries that have caused climate change have an additional responsibility compared to weaker countries like Pakistan and others, uh, to pay for damages and losses emerging out of climate change. That principle got diluted over the years, and the developing countries lost the appeal and the centrality of that principle, as many financial windows were opened, such as the Green Climate Fund, which were lending, sometimes concessional, sometimes private sector investment, sometimes blended, but never grant, based on the principles of grant or responsibility. I think the biggest accomplishment of this fund is that it has revived or resuscitated that principle that Pakistan and other countries had signed to. Now,
Okay.
granted that this is the beginning of a very complex and an arduous journey. It does not mean that it's a huge, big financial window, and it does not mean that the eligibility criteria has been designed. Maybe Pakistan will or will not be part of this.
So, Kirsab,
And
correct me if I'm wrong. Just for let me interject. As far as you're saying that the importance of it had perhaps diminished over time, and this reaffirms that. This step, in a
that's correct.
sense, reaffirms that. It reaffirms the pledge that they do. The countries that are responsible and can bear the brunt will contribute. So, in that
That is
sense, it is it's a huge step forward. Am I right?
It's a very big step forward,
Ji.
and not just that. I think it's a foreign policy success for Pakistan that we have not had in the last 30 years on climate change.
Right.
And very
Okay.
importantly, I think in our minister's case, Shahri Rahman's case, we got a champion for the cause. That's not an easy thing for a country to have. There were 200 ministers, but not everybody was a champion. I think I need to point out a couple of more things which are very critical.
I will come back to you and I will let you point out those things, but let me first go to Munir Saab and I will come back to you. Ji, Munir Saab, it's what Taqir Saab is saying. He's saying that certainly it's a huge step forward, certainly for our foreign office also, our diplomacy, foreign diplomacy. Shahri Rahman said that it's been a long 30-year journey from demand to formation of the loss of damage fund for 134 countries. We welcome today's announcement and joint text hammered out through many nights. It's an important first step in reaffirming the core principles of climate justice. As far as reaffirmation is concerned, this is in essence, I think, what Taqir Saab is also saying. He's saying that that step forward or that diminished responsibility, whatever, this has necessitated a kind of, reaffirmation there. So in that sense, it's a huge step forward. And we are one of those countries that have solely taken up the cause. Isn't that true? Like recently, because of the damage that we've ourselves suffered.
Yes, Ali Taqir Saab has very rightly said that Pakistan and countries like Pakistan have been struggling for more than 3 decades now. And finally, the vulnerable countries' stance is reaffirmed by the launch of this fund. And very recently, we have seen Pakistan quite vigorously putting up climate diplomacy on different forums, and right from SCO to SICA to UN General Assembly. And very vigorously we pitched for the need of this fund. And this is not only Pakistan's contribution to the climate diplomacy, but also there was a fact that Europe also got affected by the heat wave this summer.
Right. So,
and
the effects of climate
that
change have been felt all over.
Yeah. That was also that they have realized. And meanwhile, we have been watching the other institutions and the organizations and countries that was in denial of the climate change and its impact. They also realized it is a real-time phenomena, and it is happening very fast, and those developed countries have to contribute not only to mitigate the impact of climate change for the vulnerable countries. They have suffered from the irrational industrialization of the developed countries, but now the damage and loss at their own doorstep. So that was like one of their realization by the developed countries. And besides the disaster that Pakistan faced, and finally Pakistan really played on the front foot, and certainly the pitching of the disaster impact also contributed much to the realization that was realized at UN General Assembly by the developed world as well.
Ji, Ali Salman Sahab, in terms of the next step forward, how do we, where do we go from here? You know, while acknowledging it's a huge step, while acknowledging as far as our climate diplomacy is concerned, Foreign Office also their role, the effort that has been played, all of that, what's the next step forward for Pakistan now?
Yeah, before I come to the next step, I'd like to briefly comment on what Munir Saab just mentioned about the industrialization, and with a little difference of opinion also here.
Okay.
And I think that's important to realize also, perhaps being coming from an economics point of view. Look, Pakistan and countries like Pakistan also needs to create a lot of jobs, and we need also access to cheaper sources of energy. While it is very important to, let's say, shift to sustainable sources of energy, it has certainly a much higher cost. Right now our energy mix is like we have 64% dependency on the fossil fuels.
Okay.
And for Pakistan to commit to the climate change United Nations goals and reduce the emissions, it needs to achieve a significant reversal and come up to like 60% renewable, which is, right now it doesn't seem quite feasible.
Okay.
I think while we are talking about industrialization, we need to also realize that we need more manufacturing jobs, we need more industrialization jobs. And while the climate justice debate at the global level, may funnel, I would say, some dollars for countries like Pakistan, but it is not going to make a huge impact when it comes to poverty reduction. Now, for the next step is concerned.
But what about stemming the kind of damage that we've seen as far as our, for floods is concerned? Will it do that?
Yeah, so I think that is, in my opinion, that has mostly to do with the quality of our infrastructure. Okay. And the kind of development projects that we have undertaken in last few years.
But what about helping those who have suffered? It will go towards helping people who have been affected.
I hope it goes towards that. Normally it stays in the government ministries and bureaucracies and what you have. So it unfortunately does not translate into changes at ground level. Okay. So what I'm saying is,
you're saying that that fund, if I'm not wrong, should go towards actual gains, in the sense changing infrastructure, making those changes which will make it make us less susceptible to more damage in the future.
That's right. I think that's the if you see the history of how the global funds under climate change have been flowing. The developed countries have not contributed already too much. And
right, on that note,
that is something we have to see in the future.
Right, on that note, and the role of developed countries and how much they've contributed, will this ensure that they do contribute in the future? All of that today. A little later on, we'll be taking a short break.
When one door of happiness closes, another opens. But often we look so long at the closed door that we do not see the one which has been opened for us.
Responsible.
Right, welcome back. I'm going to go to Ali Tawqir Saab. Ji, Tawqir Saab, in terms of how the world views climate change, climate damage, do you think it will significantly change that? Because this is 134 countries coming together, sitting down and coming to this conclusion that something needs to be done. So in that sense, do you think it will change the way the world views climate change and climate damage?
In financial terms, it will be a boutique shop. Very small finances for very small countries such as island nations like Maldives or Fiji, and least developed countries such as Nepal, Malawi. They have kept the door ajar for low middle income countries like Pakistan because of big disaster that we have, but we don't know as yet. It will depend on the work during the coming year that how much of that will be welcomed. Uh, the important thing is that it accepts something that is not provisioned in the UNFCCC framework. That is the framework for climate change convention. It accepts only mitigation and adaptation. What we have done is we have gone beyond the convention and we have accepted the principle of loss and damage. Loss and damage is a technical scientific term which essentially means the damages and losses that cannot be reversed. A house can be reconstructed, a bridge can be reconstructed, that is not loss and damage. Seawater rise, glacial melt, migration of people, Manjudaru, things of this sort, a graveyard, ancestral graveyard, these will fit in this category that cannot be adapted to. Now, having said that, Pakistan is a very large country and it's a larger role than acquiring the finances from this kind of window. I think there's an opportunity for Pakistan to get engaged in the process during the year. There'll be 2 or 3 key meetings that will determine the space and the landscape of this finance, the eligibility criteria, and the categories that will be acceptable, and the scale of financing for different kinds of disasters. In those, Pakistan need to get engaged, and given the limited capacity that we have, the biggest challenge will be as our team comes back to plan for the year ahead and see how best we can be co-architects of this fund and try to embed some provisions that will be useful for Pakistan going forward. So more than financing, it's like IMF, it gives you license of legitimacy for other financing. Likewise, this financial window will give us license for acceptability from World Bank, IMF, private sector, and other windows such as GCF and Adaptation Fund and numerous other funds that exist. So it's a very welcome development from Pakistan's point of view.
In terms of the amount, in terms of the amount of $230 million, which is, of course, quite low in the sense that, the kind of damage that countries have suffered, Pakistan also. Is this the lowest amount and then the countries will agree to more? How do you see this?
Actually, this is not an official figure. I don't know where did it come from. The document that I've read talks about the process, how the fund will be established, spread over next 2 years. There's no the size of the the size of the fund is not defined. There are different figures floating. It really depends on contributing countries to make it much larger, and that's why I think Pakistan needs to get involved to make sure that it's a several billion-dollar project fund and not only $200 or $300 million project fund.
Right, let me come back to you. Munisa, when Tokir Sahab says, he says that Pakistan needs to get involved to ensure that this sum is increased if this is an official sum. But how do you mean? I mean, we need to agitate and we need to talk about this. Certainly those things, those parameters still need to be ascertained, if I'm not wrong.
You are right. Not agitate. We cannot agitate, and there are many activists around the world. They are agitating
taking
about
an active
it, and
role in putting forward.
I think we need to vigorously increase our climate diplomacy that we initiated a couple of months back. A few months back, that we embarked upon having our voice heard in the Committee of Nations, and that is the best way to do it. And some time back, our Foreign Office was also very instrumental in such kind of propagation of Pakistan's point of view. And after a long time, we saw it again, that Pakistan Foreign Office and Pakistan's Climate Ministry and the Prime Minister's Secretariat, they all, they were like propagating their stance very effectively.
But this is 134 countries that came
134 countries. Certainly, I believe, like, as Pakistan has taken a lead on climate advocacy to like reaffirmation of the fund, Pakistan still have the room and the capacity to lead 134 countries. Most of them are very small, as Taqir Sahab said, some islands as well. They don't have that much say as Pakistan has. Pakistan has a larger frame work of international collaboration as well. And many countries listen to Pakistan's stance over various issues.
Right.
And same is the case that Pakistan's climate impact challenge was also heard. And this is the right moment. Pakistan keep on taking lead on such issues and can vigorously have 134 countries on board consistently and watching the measures being taken to develop such funds and the commitments being made, and about the TORs, and certainly a larger framework for the loss and damage fund still will be developed, and Pakistan can lead such countries to develop, and Pakistan has the capacity.
Right.
As Ali Taqir Sahab said, Pakistan has played its role in the previous decades as well. So we have to come again to play on the forefront and on the front foot again.
Right, let me come back to you. Ali Salman Sahab, what about the role of countries like the US? Will we define will it be more defined in terms of how you expect the TORs to be, in your opinion? Of course, we don't have the TORs at this time, but what do you expect? I mean, countries like, which are the largest carbon emitters or, fossil fuel emitters overall, or contributing to climate damage, will those countries, it'll be, will they be contributing more? How will it work, in your opinion, the framework of it?
Well, I think broadly this commitment and this declaration already suggests that these countries, the industrialized countries, are also a part of this agreement.
Okay.
And we would definitely hope that from this point on forward, as Ali Taqir Sheikh also mentioned, that we are, by this agreement actually we have introduced a change at the level of UN global commitment, and the whole idea of some kind of climate justice has been introduced. So I would expect that countries like US and China would be contributing more.
Okay.
But if you look at their record, let's say in the Green Climate Change Fund and other funds,
Right.
they have not met their targets. And their contribution in these global funds, which were already existing, is much smaller than their promises in the past. Right? So that is not a hopeful sign. But I would again say that this loss and damage principle is a new principle. Right?
Okay.
So this was not existing before in the global conventions and discussions. So it's too early to say that how these countries are actually going to change.
But how is this different then? I will, let me go to Ali Taqir Sahab. Ji, Ali Taqir Sahab, how is this then different from, for example, the Paris Agreement or the Green Climate Fund, which is what Ali Salman Sahab is saying?
See, the difference between global north and global south, if we say you are responsible for the damages, then there'll be question of retribution or compensation. And looking at the danger of such processes where the lawsuits are filed by one country against the other, the country dread becoming bankrupt sitting in Europe and US will not like to include that. Therefore, the Paris Agreement specifically says that we will support loss and damage only to the extent that this does not include in any direct or indirect, implicit or explicit way reference to retribution or compensation. Therefore, the developing countries like Pakistan have signed away this right for compensation. So from today onwards, anybody who says that we are the victim, that you are responsible, is in effect violating the document that we have signed. Now, having said that, there are a lot of lawsuits that are theoretically possible between the citizens, between the private sector and the governments, and between the private sector and the citizens, but not between the countries as far as loss and damage is concerned.
In terms, of course, as far as international law is concerned, as far as international, agreements, international, that will necessarily govern the whole situation. And of course, we know the clout global north has. We know, the difference as far as, in our what can one say, economies, all of those things are, and those are realities that you're saying will play a part.
Exactly. Exactly. The whole conversation is about not compensation and adversarial relationship. I think the conversation is about um, un compassion and humanity and moving forward, not looking back at what has happened historically. And that's why in this funds document it says that China, Qatar, and some Southeast Asian rich nations will also pay and contribute towards these funds. Otherwise, if we go in terms of historical responsibility, it will be United States and Europe. When you include countries like India and China to pay for it, that means we are moving beyond the responsibility part, and we are working on the basis of some partnership and some kind of humanitarian relationship to move forward.
But we don't know. I mean, we're not clear as to whether it attributes, it only asks countries which are responsible for most of the emissions, or is it going to be other countries also? We don't know that at this time.
We certainly know that the principle of historical responsibility is not mentioned in the document.
Okay.
We know that's not the operative principle, and we're looking at the principles of poverty. Some countries do not have enough resources, and those who are endowed with resources. So those who have more money will help others. It's not based on the
That's the principle of it.
historical.
Okay. Ji, Munir Sahab, the principle of it seems quite simple. It's about, like Tawqir Sahab is saying, the countries with more money are to help those which don't have enough. The kind of damage that we've seen, is it going to be, how much, of course, how much money is needed, how much this fund will actually contribute, the amount of it, perhaps will also be determined by the kind of damage that we've recently seen as far as different countries are concerned. Pakistan, of course, is higher, one of the highest, but there are other countries also. And we will be seeing in the next, year, I guess, like you said, there will be more meetings and things will be determined. As far as our climate diplomacy is concerned, from the UN address of the Prime Minister, from the visit of Antonio Guterres, then our Foreign Minister also, we've taken up this issue further. More of that engagement perhaps will prove fruitful in how much this fund will come to for us in terms of having it, come to a tangible gain. True?
Certainly, yes. Like consistent engagement with the parties, the developed world countries, certainly will help.
In what form? Do you
But
see more?
at the moment, Pakistan is looking for some funds to rehabilitation and reconstruction of the 1/3 of Pakistan that has been underwater, and we have like severe losses of because of the floods. Certainly we are looking for that. But as far as the loss and damage fund is concerned, that is still has to take some shape, and I'm not sure that it will be able to cope up all the damages and loss, as Tawqir Sahab said, that it is not based on the historic contribution to the damage and loss, and it is just on compassion and humanitarian sympathies, sort of. So I believe.
So in terms of how binding it is, how whether it will actually translate, all of those things, like I said, will be determined by how much we push, how much diplomacy there is, how much power each country has, all of those realities.
MAHRUKH, it is always your consistent engagement with the parties, and it's a continuous process of negotiations, and as much you keep on pushing forward your stance, you would have a better share from the funds. And but unfortunately, we cannot push the developed world to contribute into green climate fund so far.
Right.
And it could have only 7-8% of the commitments they had to. So I'm not very optimistic about this fund too, that they will be contributing. But meanwhile, I believe at least we should ask them whatever loss has been done to Pakistan, at least we should get major share, sufficient funds to go for reconstruction and rehabilitation phase. And also we need certain technology transfer and capacity building so that we can help our communities and sub-national governments.
But will it cover also future damage, prevention from future damage, fortifying countries, or will it only be about how much loss?
At this moment, still we are not clear, but it would cover the loss. For example, in the coming years, whatever loss and damage would occur, that would be covered in the fund. And the Green Climate Fund is basically to provide technology and funds for the capacity building in adaptation and like helping poor nations to have some mechanisms to mitigate the impact of disasters. Still, we are looking for that funds. But meanwhile, I believe the developed countries should adopt some green practices. They have to
but why is
go for
the failure of, let's talk about that,
Yeah.
let me go to Ali Salman Saab. Ji, why is the Green Climate Fund, why have we not been able to make that a success? Let's talk about that.
Well, I can talk a little bit on behalf of like Pakistan's experience in terms of accessing this fund. My understanding is that it requires a certain level of capacity both in the government and also the private sector partners to be able to pitch the projects which are convincing, from a global perspective, but also which are economically feasible. So if we are talking about, let's say, renewable energy project or the water conservation projects, these projects, or even let's say the forestation projects, these projects are the favorite for the climate change green fund. But right now, I think the capacity in the private sector as well as the Ministry of Climate Change, I think we need to talk about that as well. While we're talking about the global level, we need to see.
You're saying that effort perhaps wasn't there, that was needed earlier on?
We hope that it can be done in the future. We hope that the Ministry of the Climate Change can actually build up its own capacity, and we hope that we can actually also introduce the knowledge in the private sector of Pakistan to be able to benefit and participate in these funds from a from an economic feasibility point of view and from project management point of view. And that is, I think, still a large question mark, and that is, it does not depend on how much funds is available. It depends on the capacity of the participating countries.
But that doesn't take away from the responsibility of countries that are the largest emitters of fossil fuel.
But here I'm saying something else. Here I'm saying that even the funds which are available,
have to be used.
We have not been able to utilize properly.
Right. Ji, Tawqir Sahab, if you've been following, Ali Salman Sahab is saying that as far as funds that are available, using those also is something that perhaps we need to look at. But in terms of, as far as the damage at this time is concerned, as far as our own house is concerned, it's always a debate about what we could have done. What we can still do to fortify ourselves as far as climate damage is concerned. But isn't that true that it's very limited, even if we do our best, if we don't have the kind of help that we need, and these emitters, carbon emitters, the largest carbon emitters at this time in the world, if they don't come and help, there's still very limited that we can do, and on the home front.
Well, I don't know how far I will agree with you, but I think you have raised a very difficult question. There's a lot that we can do. First, about the financing. In order to access Green Climate Fund or Adaptation Fund, that is competitive bidding. And Government of Pakistan is not used to bidding for financing. It has only two sources of financing. One is the taxes and duties that it gets from its citizens, Second, it's the loans that it gets from multilaterals or bilaterals. It is not in the habit of applying for funds and then waiting for the result to succeed or to fail. So
Okay.
therefore, in order to access global or international climate finances, we'll need to start a third stream of financing, which is very competitive, where you develop good proposals, much better than RTC one. And then I think we have a lot of talent in this country. We can secure those finances. And so far, our share of CF financing has been extremely limited and minuscule. Pakistan is a very large country. The
But
population-
Tawqir Sahib, are we not being too critical? Are we not, of course, I mean, I agree with you in the sense that whatever we can do on the home front should be done. But like I said, isn't there, we can only take a percentage of responsibility.
Well, it is our population. We have to take 100% responsibility because international finance may not come or may come in very small quantities. As I was saying, it's a very large country. I mean, we lost $30 billion and there's no international finance window that can provide even 1/10 of that. There's no window that can provide even $1 billion. We'll have to go to World Bank or IMF to take loans for this. So that's exactly what I'm trying to say. International finance is a very small component of this. Please
Okay.
remember that Pakistan's population is more than 45 members of the most vulnerable countries this fund is being created for. All the island countries put together will have less population than Pakistan.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is there is a lot we can do. And that is, as we start doing that, we'll have enhanced capability and enhanced credibility that will improve our ability to access international finance.
Okay, fair enough. Ji, Munir Sahib, your quick comments, we're also running out of time overall.
Overall, as Salman Sahib said and Tawqir Sahib said, we are definitely have not the capacity that we are looking for to pitch Pakistan's bid for such kind of funding. The one thing that I see is Pakistan is a data deficient country. We don't have accuracy of the data that would be that would support such kind of bid that we are looking for. Secondly, the urge to pitch the right amount and a rational project over there. And the third deficiency that we have is that whatever funding we get, the donors always have questions over it, observations over it. The rational use of the fundings were given to Pakistan for certain, and they could not see the kind of results they were looking for after the funding was given to
So
Pakistan.
we need to work on our own capability to get that kind of.
In one word, if I say, we need to improve our governance.
Right.
From utilization of funds to the grassroots level of management.
Fair enough. Ji, Salman Sahib, your comments.
Well, my final comment is that I think we need to improve upon the infrastructure to actually minimize the future damages, because we should expect such events in the future also.
Okay.
And certainly no global aid or grant will be able to help us in any significant manner. This is very clear. And at the same time, I think we need to actually improve our own economic growth. That is extremely important for the future generation.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us. Munir Ahmed Saab, thank you for joining us. Ali Salman Saab, thank you for being with us. Ali Tawqir Sheikh, thank you for joining us today. Overall, of course, while this also is a time for introspection in the sense of what we can do. It's also a time of celebration. It's a huge step forward for Pakistan as far as this loss and damage fund adoption of it is concerned. It is a success of our climate diplomacy. As far as our engagement with countries is concerned, our engagement with the global north is concerned, it's also a reaffirmation of the kind of damage that we've suffered, and the fact that countries that are the largest emitters of these fuels need to own up, and there can be This is no small measure of, an achievement as far as the country, our own foreign office is concerned, our climate diplomacy is concerned, and that cannot be taken away from what's happened as far as this adoption of loss and damage fund is concerned. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.